So I want to say first, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about EDI. It's a really complex topic, and when we started to make planning for this session, I really wanted to talk about how EDI is the work that you're already doing and some of your biggest problems. And sometimes we just kind of need to reframe and reshape what we're doing so that it fits into our spaces. So I appreciate the AACP giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you. So we're going to take quite a weird learning path today. We're going to go one way, we're going to come back. And at the end of this, you're going to walk away with some tangible tools to really take this into your spaces. So the first thing I want you to think about as we think about today and what we're going to be talking about and where we're going to be going with this is, why are you here? And that seems kind of like uh, an odd question to ask, but I want to know, why are you here? Tell me what brought you to sign up for this. What's your buy-in? Where's the investment for you? And I also want to ask you for like a quick pulse check. So I want to see how people are feeling. Are you excited about this? Are you nervous? Are you uncertain? Are you curious? Are you hesitant? Or are you skeptical? And all of those are super valid responses in how you feel about today. As we go through, as you're voting, as we go through today, we're going to frame EDI. We're going to try and see where we're at and why we're having this conversation. I'm super passionate about it, so I could talk about it with any of you for hours at a time, but I'm going to kind of give you the lay of the land of why we're doing this here today and what that looks like. Then we're going to talk about where and how now. So we're going to say kind of a gauge of the history and how we've gotten to this point, why EDI matters, what's working, what we can do to kind of revision this, and then what it looks like in the everyday and those takeaway tools for you. So it's a lot in a little bit of time, and I'm just going to share those results for you because this is actually super exciting. You see that a lot of you, more than half of you that responded are curious, excited, and that's really great because curiosity is what kind of leads this conversation and helps us get into a mindset of new learning. I'm also very aware that a couple of people said they're skeptical, nervous, uncertain, and that's okay too, because everyone that I've come in contact with ever talking about EDI has some of those feelings. And that's just because it's going to be a little different than where we're at, what we've learned in the past and maybe where we're going. A little bit of background about myself, because I know that you have been graciously told my background from your AACP team, and they've brought me here, but I want to give you a little bit of my own background so that you know why I'm having this conversation with you today. Professionally, my work is in corporate training, so I engage with workplaces to develop recruitment and retention strategies, workplace culture development, responsive action, management and leadership training, kind of everything in that sort. I was a K-12 teacher, and that's where I started to create cool classrooms. And then I thought, hey, I can bring this out into the workplace too. I'm an instructor at St. Clair College here in Windsor, Ontario. And in our region, we offer an advanced law enforcement program to improve workplace dynamics related to policing, which we just recently launched and we've been piloting with our local policing agencies. I'm the founder of our local Thought Leader Society, where I provide open education, which is kind of how when I first got reached out to on this project, I got kind of sucked in because I am a huge proponent of open education, so I am 100% excited to share my insights with you. I also work with our local economic development board, and I review childhood education content for research. My doctoral research, which I just finished, super thrilled to share. I looked at the perspectives of equity, diversity, and inclusion training for police officers. I'm going to share some of that insight with you later on today. And my ongoing policing and learning theory research focuses on on-site training at Canadian and American policing agencies and frontline training approaches and skill trades. So you'll see that there's some of those, you'll see a lot of the stories about that today as I go through them with you and kind of share what my findings are. And then you can kind of get the gist of how we've gotten to this point. But the most important question of the day, I think we need to talk about, and you know what, I did think about this very seriously. I said, should I integrate a how sad are we that the Blue Jays lost the World Series question instead. But I thought, I think it might be too soon to ask a question like this because it was so fresh and so sad. The irony behind that, like for me, it's very difficult because my brother lives in Los Angeles. He recently moved there from Toronto. So he is a both fan, and he put all over social media, he's like, go blue team. And that was kind of his thing. So let me hear it. Who are you a fan of? And this is interesting because like when I looked at the registration, it was pretty split between Calgary and Edmonton. So I knew that the polls were going to be split as well. But I want to draw our quick attention to the chat because, yeah, Calgary does have an NHL team, Derek. They're not minor league, I promise you, though sometimes they may come across that way. Um, very quickly, I saw people put their answers in the chat. There's a few others. If you are an other, please tell us who you are rooting for because I'm super excited to know. And I'll show you right now in about 2 seconds. You have surprisingly less people in this chat from Edmonton and more Edmonton fans in the chat. And the only thing I can deduce from that is there's some secret Edmonton fans in Calgary. And I don't know how we broke them. So I'm seeing Vancouver Canucks, Jets, Leafs fans. Oh, Brandy, you're not a secret fan. You're in Calgary and you've changed. So Brandy, if you're willing to share, I'd be curious. Why are you a Oilers fan in Calgary? Because I just need to know.
Because they're like ridiculously awesome. So, and have you been to an Oilers game in Edmonton? Like they've literally got the best fans. Like that place is just a rockin' venue. So, I am not ashamed to be an Oilers fan in Cowtown.
Oh, so it's the venue, it's the vibes that really bought you in, not necessarily the team.
I mean, the team is good, but I've been like a long-time Oilers fan. I remember the heartbreak when Gretzky got traded, and I was like an anti-Oilers fan for a really long time because I was still mad at him. But he's old now, so I guess I can forgive it.
Oh, okay. I mean, you've moved on. But are you an Oilers fan like generationally, or is this new in your family?
I grew up in BC, so generationally we're Canucks fans because we had
Oh,
one channel and it was CBC. So Hockey Night in Canada in BC, you got to watch the Canucks. So
okay,
it's
fair.
Canucks first, then Oilers.
Okay, I like that. We have some not huge hockey fans in the chat. I like that you said that, Rick, because like when I was training all last week and I got to go into spaces almost every day after there was a Blue Jays game, and everyone talked about it for the first hour of the session. And as they were talking about it, I was like, I realized that half of these are bandwagon fans and they're not actual fans. And the night that it was different for you, the night that the game went till 3 a.m. here in Eastern Standard Time, I trained the next morning and everyone's like, oh, sorry, I'm so tired. I watched the game last night. And I said, oh, you're a Blue Jays fan? They're like, no, it was just, we were out. And so it's kind of like that collective, everyone just jumped on. Anyone else have like a passion? Is anyone like a generational fan of a team? Or is there like a deep connection or a tie to a team that you just need us to know about? Because I would like to know. I'm married into a Red Wings family. So I need to know where these sports associations are. Anyone got sports associations? None. I know a lot of you do. See, look, there's always got to be a shout out for another team, and I'm so excited it came because Jody shouted out lacrosse, and I'm so excited about this because Jody, do you want to share why the lacrosse is so important for us to recognize that we are fans of? Lacrosse doesn't exist here. It does exist here in Ontario, but it's not our priority right now. Thanks, Candace, for sharing. Playing basketball in the 90s, and you had to love the Bulls. That's true. Basketball is also, we're also Bulls fans, and from the 90s, I think. And then we're college football fans. We have a lot of like lean into different spots. The reason I wanted to start here is because this is EDI. This is that big, scary conversation that we need to have. And it's, who do you watch on TV? What does your weekend look like? And there's so many other facets to this, because we talked about basketball in the chat, there's lacrosse in the chat, there's soccer in the chat. And when we recognize that there's other things going on, we can kind of reframe where our lens is coming from. So if I'm talking about the World Series, or I'm talking about the Oilers Flames rivalry, that's because that's my understanding. So in the chat, someone said lacrosse is the national sport, and yes, it is. And it's not really treated as the national sport when it comes to conversations about it. Rugby coming up in the chat. When we start to think about why we like a certain team, or why we watch a certain team, whether it's our family members, or if we've married into a family that watches sports, or it's just kind of the city we're in, that it becomes a part of us and it becomes big, that is our diversity. And then when you talk about the other pieces of it, when we really want to look at how it applies into our workspaces and how we respond to it, it's, do we understand that someone came in late because their kids were in sports in the morning, which I know that a lot of times now children's practices are like 4 o'clock in the morning now, 4 or 5 for hockey, or maybe they were playing late at night, or maybe their team was playing late at night, or maybe they spent the weekend watching a series that they can't do an extra thing. And so a lot of the time when we think about EDI as these big things, it is those big things, but it's also these very little things. And when we have these conversations, it's important to have these little conversations, because we get passionate. And I'm excited that you're passionate. I'm excited that you have favorite teams, because knowing our perspective of how we got to this point in terms of sports is the same thing of how we view every other piece of our world. So I need you to share some insights with me. And when you brought up which environment is better, I was excited.
Must have gotten vertigo or something.
And I want you to think about the last time you went to something, went to a sporting event, went to a concert, went to anything that has tiered seating. And I want you to share with me, you can put your hand up or you can put in the chat. I want you to tell me who sits at the front, who sits all the way at the back. Tell me about your experiences. When was the last time you were at a game? Maybe you were recently at a game or at a concert. I want you to tell me where you sat, what you experienced, what it was like. Does anyone have any good games that they've gone to? Any concerts? One time I asked someone and they had just gone to the opera, and I learned a lot about the opera that day. What have you gone to that had tiered seating? So I saw in the chat at Babyface concert in Niagara. You were just belting it out. You were in the being wild in the back. Fair. And what does the back of hockey stadiums look like, or hockey arenas look like? If you're sitting all the way up in the back, what's the vibes up there? What's going on at the very back of these concerts and of these hockey games? I'll tell you what's going on up there. They're making wizard sticks. They've got their cups stacked together, and they're kind of just doing all the wild things. See, I got someone with those wizard sticks. I want to know where you're going, what you're doing. Nosebleeds, draft beer section. It's true. Leonard Skinner concert, all the young folks standing on the floor section, old folks up at the top. Yeah, because you know what? I don't need to die at a concert. I've been on the floor. I'm too short to be on the floor. My husband's 6'4", and so he can be on the floor. So he often books things that he can see at, and I cannot. What about the people up front? Who's sitting at the front? Who's sitting at the front of these events? Not me, I'll tell you that. If anyone will try to get Taylor Swift tickets, they were spending $10,000. Sponsors, people who can afford it. Sting concert at Red Rock Amphitheater in Colorado. First of all, beautiful venue. Full mix, top to bottom. That venue is like gorgeous. typicals, those who can afford. So we're talking about these views, and we can see the views so drastically different. When you're right up at the front of these events and you're viewing the game, you can't see much, right? You're looking at the game from a small window of lens. You can either see one end where you are or the other, and it's not always the best view. And when you're all the way up at the back, you're seeing everything. But you might not be involved. You might not be the person that's on the Jumbotron. You might not be the person that gets picked for the activities or whatever it may be. I go to a lot of football games, and I don't sit at the front because it doesn't have the best vantage point. We like to sit in the middle so that we can kind of see what's going on, and that we're not all the way up in the cheaper seats because we know it's just chaotic up there. And I've noticed something over time. The closer you are, you have that smaller window of vision, but it's also the people who are sponsors, who've gotten free tickets, who won tickets, who have the money to buy those tickets for whatever reason, wanting to sit up close. People in the middle can kind of get a view of everything, and then people all the way back, they see. If you've ever been to a concert and you've been on the floor seats and you've had the person that put their big sign up in front of you and blocked your view, or you see people that go on other people's shoulders, that's when we start to kind of realize, oh, maybe my view would be better from the front. Now, there's something interesting about hockey and EDI, is that this space that you're looking at and the way that we're engaging with other people is the way that we operate in society. The closer you are to the game, the less you see of the full vision of the game. So in your organization, if you have maybe a more senior position, you may be just looking at your section of the game. When you're a little further back, if you're a staff sergeant, or you're in a position where you're controlling still a group of people, but you're also responding, you may see the bigger game, the bigger picture, but you're still supporting the people behind you, potentially blocking them. And then if you're all the way in the back, if you're a frontline officer and you're looking forward, you're seeing everything that's going on. This is not the same for every organization in every space, but this is a challenge that we face in society as a whole, because the closer you are to the center, we kind of have this power connected to it. If you go to watch the Clippers, the Celtics have it too. There's a few other, Toronto Raptors have it. It's called Celebrity Row. The closer you are, there's like a little celebrity row where they give away tickets. The Clippers Celebrity Row, you have to be offered to buy the ticket. You can't just sit there. And that's because they want like top A-list celebrities sitting on the side. They do the same thing in LA, where certain people have to be there. But here's the thing. In Toronto, we have Drake and the Superfan that sit in Celebrity Row. Drake and the Superfan are not turning around and waving at me and Gina up in the nosebleeds. They're not going to turn around and say, hey, did you get enough popcorn? Can you see the game? Do you want a t-shirt when they shoot the t-shirt cannon? They're not going to be doing that because they're in the game. The people in the middle might notice, hey, they're in the game, but they're not paying attention to the whole game. And then the people all the way at the back, you have the opportunity to view all of these issues that are existing, the people that are blocking you, the lack of resources, lack of support. And the challenge with that is they can be aware, but they may not be able to contribute to the change. So when we talk about it in society, we can see these same kind of hierarchies exist. And really, it's because the further you are up, the closer you are, you're not turning around and looking at everyone at the back. And that's okay, because that's how we function. But sometimes we need to turn around intentionally to see what is their experience like and how can my experience be better. If I have someone on my shoulders or I'm holding up my big sign, I need to be conscious that there's someone behind me that can't participate fully in the game because of it. And so really we're talking about creating that clearer view for other people. So to situate ourselves for today, I want to frame and anchor what we're learning in a couple pieces. So we're going to explore why EDI remains controversial and a difficult topic in policing. We're going to talk about identifying common barriers for buy-in and your internal engagement, how to assess your organization's current and cultural readiness for EDI maturity, understanding how to create complex spaces for meaningful and low-risk dialogue, on complex topics, and beginning developing and refining our context-specific why and how that can resonate internally at your organization. So recognizing the unique challenges and opportunities of applying EDI in policing environments, facilitating or supporting meaningful work, using low-risk conversations about EDI to support your teams, returning to your organizations with practical tools, using shared language and increased confidence, and reflecting on your agency's culture, readiness, and alignment with broader commitments such as truth and reconciliation, commission calls to action, and strengthening that internal engagement and leadership capacity to support long-term EDI development. And ultimately, what we want you to walk away from here with today is a new perspective of what EDI is and how you can do it, and how you can do it in a way that's sustainable, that's going to be effective in your space long-term. So let's jump into the meat of it. And the meat of it is going to come with a really hard question. These are anonymous. Your responses to me are anonymous. And so I don't know who votes for what. So this is where we start our vulnerability for the day. You can share us your why in the chat, or you can just share in the poll. But I want you to tell me how you think you rank. Do you think before you vote, I want you to gauge how the public views policing organizations. Do you think that you're at a 1, or do you think you're at a 10? Do you think that the public is still viewing policing organizations at a let's defund them? Or do you think we're all the way up being the best ever? And sometimes I wish I could see who votes, because when I see someone say that you're the best ever, and I'm like, I need to know more. I want to know how you're doing this. You can share in the chat if you have some more insights to tell us why you think you are one or the other, or what you think our current challenges are, or where your head's at. But I'm excited to see how you're ranking yourselves of where you're at, because this is a really important place for us to start. If you don't know where you think the public is at, then how do we know what we need to do to improve or to change? So I'm going to end the poll in about 5 seconds if you haven't had a chance to vote. And then I'm going to share it outward so you can see everyone else's votes. So I'm going to go ahead and share that outward. So you can see we're kind of in the middle. So we have vote all the way from a 2 up to an 8, with our majority sitting at about a 5. And I appreciate your responses, because there's reasons behind this. And we're going to start digging into those reasons today about why we are ranging from a 2 to an 8, what your organizations are doing differently, what you're focusing on, who you're asking to find out that you're a 2 or an 8, and really where we are at. So thank you for sharing that. So I want to get into how did we get here? Because this is probably the most difficult conversation that I've had in policing anywhere. It's difficult in Canada. It's difficult in the United States. I've had policing conversations abroad. I have this terrible habit, and my husband hates it, is that no matter where I go, I will find the police department and I will talk to them. And so any vacation turns into work, because I like to learn what types of trainings they have, what are they doing there, why are they doing it this way, what problems do they have? And it all leads back to the relationships that law enforcement have with their communities. So I'm going to walk you through the last 225 years of history in 2.5 minutes. And at the end of this, I want you to share with me how you feel. Not, do you feel good? Do you feel bad? I want you to share, is this new? Or is this something that you know? And there's something I want you to keep trending along the way, is you'll see there's a bold text and it's identifying community demographics. So in the 1800s, when we first started the development of Canada, pre-Canada, there was the initiation of policing agencies that supported property and interests of the social elite. And this is really important to start here, because when we talk about the tie between law enforcement and colonialism, we talk about how it was brought in. There's not a ton of conversation in our communities about what other demographics do for policing and for the judicial system, but we do talk a lot about colonialism and the tie to policing and the judicial system. And that's why it's so important, because we want to talk about why people think a certain way about policing, not how policing is the way we are. We want to talk about the influences. So then we started to develop programming through organizations like the Northwest Mounted Police before it became the RCMP, related to the Indigenous communities. Then we saw the Northwest Mounted Police tied to the Métis resistance, and we saw a lot of relationships with the Francophone communities and Indigenous populations in the 1800s. There's so much to unpack there, but I really want to draw attention to that it was us versus them. Then when it came into the 1900s, we saw that similar us versus them carry out to other demographics. We saw Ukrainian, German, and Eastern European immigrants during World War I through the War Measures Act. We saw Japanese internment camps. We started to see labor organizations being fought, communist organizations and labor activists. And really, it's back to that us versus them. And we see that us as, here's what policing organizations were doing, was enforcing a way of life or an expectation for populations, and then all the populations that got harmed as a result of that being upheld, or whatever those ideas were. In continuing in the 1900s, we saw the fruit machine process go through in the 50s and 60s for used by the RCMP and the federal government to address 2S LGBTQ community employees in civil service, removing them from positions. We saw the slaughter of Inuit sled dogs. We saw the RCMP destabilizing Red Power movements, which is tied to Indigenous movements, Black liberation groups, and other civil rights organizations, alongside the same action in the United States. We also saw the 60s scoop, which was supported by police. And this one's really important to talk about because this, alongside the initial development of the Northwest Mounted Police, is that it was tied to the government action of quote unquote social support. So the way that the government kind of collected police action with the action that they were also doing. So police were never apolitical. They were tied to whatever government was doing at the time, whether they were telling them to do this or that, that was the role of police. In the late 1900s, we started to see Black communities be more affected. I think that the tie here was the population of Black communities increased. So we saw Black communities in Toronto and Halifax experiencing the rise of police surveillance. If you're not familiar with Africville in Halifax, I suggest that you take some time to look at that another day. We also saw the Rodney King riots in 92, Dudley George, a Ojibwe protester, in 95. And then it continued over the turn of the century. We started to now look historically. The turn of the century is so important because in the last 25 years, we've increased technology so much. We have more connectivity. We have more social media. We have more video and audio. And it's like hyper expressiveness all at once. And so here's 200 years of history that we're going to talk about while other things are happening, and it's going to happen all at once. Then we started to have more audio visuals of the actions that one or two or a group of police officers were engaging in, and it became that umbrella for the rest of law enforcement. Within the last 5 years, I think our most critical period, we started to see more callouts. 2020 was this weird perfect storm where we had a major social justice activist movement tied to a major health crisis. So people were pulled away from their typical spaces and they were put online where they could find an algorithm that they meshed with, and then they were able to advocate for themselves and for their groups. What you're seeing now in the last couple of months is, as you see our shift to far right extremism, the same thing is happening. So with the death of Charlie Kirk, it was another major social activist movement from the perspective of right-leaning politics. And what they were seeking was empathy, psychological safety, acknowledgement, validation, and support. Those are things that the Black communities and other marginalized communities were also expressing need for in 2020 through the pandemic. As a result of the death of George Floyd, they wanted psychological safety, support, advocacy, and all of those things, which they didn't get. And now we're starting to have a group that didn't get it be expected to provide it for a different group who's not getting it. And we see that kind of cycle over. The challenge is within these social political movements, the police are always in a hard spot because they're upholding the rights of people while they're trying to be apolitical. But the apolitical piece is hard when they're tied to the government. So the reason I'm giving you all of this information in a short, quick thing is because I could give you hundreds of thousands of pages about this. And so I want to understand, because I don't want to spend a ton of time on the history of policing, but I want to understand, did you know that this is what's existing? Did you know that this is where we're at? And there's a lot of options in the poll for you because I want to know, what are you thinking right now? Are you surprised? If there's something that you would like to unpack or say, please share it in the chat. You're more than welcome to. And the reason I'm asking you this is because the relationships with these communities are intergenerational, and the way that history has affected the current relationships today is very important because that affects how people trust, how people communicate, how people support, and that equity we're working towards. I'll give you a couple more seconds in the chat to share any or to pick, because I know the options are a lot longer than normal, to give you an opportunity to vote. I do see a couple of people talking about Africville, and Africville's unique.
Oh, maybe this is my new doc.
While people are still voting, to give them an opportunity. I think that when we talk about Africville, it's a small community experience that is representational of a larger experience across our country. And it's very hyper focused, and it's got a lot of data if you're ever interested. So I see that the voting kind of is teetering off. So I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to show everyone what the votes are like. And what you'll notice is that we have a number of people saying, yes, I have experienced this. I've learned it on my own, or I've learned it in my organization. And then we have some people saying, yes, they learned it through different experiences. But what I think is so important is that as individuals who chose to be here today, which means you're choosing to have conversations about EDI, you're interested and willing to have conversations about EDI, that there's 15 people that didn't know too much, or that they didn't know much at all. And so to have 15 people say that this isn't fully expressed to me in my role, whether related to or not, or that they are aware they need to learn more, that's so important, because this is 15 out of 78. When we think about the size of our organizations, the size of our support, the sworn and non-sworn members, our community, how much is gapped, then that can be really critical to saying, well, I want you to learn EDI, but you don't know why we're talking about it. And then maybe they're not being told why we're talking about it. So I'm going to give you a bit of that why briefly today. So where are we now? Well, as a result of that history, there's a number of communities that are directly affected. When I talk about that, I say there's a lot of marginalized communities that are affected. And I'm just going to briefly touch on some of that. When we talk about Indigenous peoples, we look at the loss of sovereignty, culture, and language, overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, restricted mobility, and survival of violence and surveillance. Black Canadians, we experience still racial profiling, carding, unwarranted stops, over-policing in schools and communities, increased likelihood of use of force, barriers to employment and housing due to criminalization. I think the very interesting part is in my region in Windsor, and you can look it up in our public school board, they did a study of students' experiences of having police officers in the classroom. And the study was about the fear associated with having police officers in the schools. And having had taught K-12, I had viewed having police officers in schools very differently as a teacher than as a student. But then I think back to when I was a student, and as a person of color in grade 10, I was attacked and beaten up in the school, on the school grounds, because I was mistaken for another girl who had a similar name and looked like me. And when I was attacked and beaten up at school, the police officer who was at the school at the time didn't believe me. And he and I had this relationship that was quite negative as a result of it, because I was lying about my relationship with the people. I knew that they were going to fight me, or that I was keeping secrets, and that if I had just shared information. And so there was then a tie with all of these other pieces. So when we talk about the relationships that people have with information, whether they're in a space or not, it's not just the then and now. It's that situation now is the way I think about things, or the way I relate to other people's situations. But even then, there's people who don't experience that, don't hear stories of that. And so the experience of where we are now is so subjective to the individual, but our relationships with these are so important. For the 2S LGBTQ community, surveillance and targeting, police raids and criminalization of safe spaces. For newcomers, we're looking at wartime internments, which dates back over 100 years, modern security laws, language and cultural barriers, which I think are so important to recognize, because our communities are changing so drastically, so quickly, that cultural barriers are a huge relationship with law enforcement issue, and also a language barrier. London police had an initiative, they had an issue where there was a newcomer who didn't know what a ride program was. And the the officer was waving people to move up, and the newcomer drove around the ride program because they thought that there was an accident or something, and they just drove around. And so we can see how there's sometimes relationship barriers as a result. Activists and allies, surveillance, infiltration, and barriers to political participation. We know allies experience challenges similarly as well. When I talk about all these groups, the reason I'm bringing it up is because I want to talk about, there's two pieces to the conversation we're going to have today. The first is the relationship between law enforcement and the public, and the second is between law enforcement and each other. So I want to talk right now first about with the public, but also then recognizing that the public is also your officers and the civilian staff and the people within the organization supporting as well. So we see the distrust that exists due to that intergenerational harm. We see mistrust in legal systems. There's ongoing lack of trust for people of various communities, distrust from other countries, and the public distrust from a fear of historical criminalization. Trust is so incredibly important for any relationship. When people don't trust others, they don't share information. For relationships with the public, that is so crucial for an organization, because without trust and without information, then it's really a one-to-one. It becomes this big brick wall barrier, because then there's no support in helping that development forward. The police are the public, and the public are the police. When we talk about how this cycles through, without that trust, that open communication and that growth and innovation together don't exist. When we talk about individuals, the relationships that people have with law enforcement, we see underreporting of crimes, fear calling for help, mental and emotional stress, and avoidance of public services. So when we are addressing our operational efficiency is directly tied to the relationships that people have with an organization and the resources and supports that they receive to alleviate that. So when we talk about underreporting or fear of calling for help, we talk about the resources and supports that are put in place, or the awareness that's put in place to alleviate that based on that historical trauma. When we talk about it with communities, it's very similar. The breakdown of community safety, we talk about the erosion of civic participation, weakened social cohesion, and that normalization of fear and trauma. There's a difference between complacency, where we're allowing people to remain victims, and empathy, where we are aware of historical injustices and biases and stereotypes that persist, that create unequal opportunity. Unequal opportunity doesn't have to mean that when an officer pulls over a Black person, that that person's automatically at a higher risk for their safety. What it means is that when someone is pulled over, it's recognized that that interaction is influenced by history. And so it may influence certain responses or certain relationship barriers or whatever it may be, and that these are not necessarily outward from an organization, that they can persist within communities, and that it becomes important for the intervention to happen on behalf of the individuals. Okay, I want to talk about the relationship with the public and law enforcement. This is a barrier. When we talked about the ratings from 2 to 8, when we talk about the public's relationship, it is so critical for public engagement. And you don't know that you don't have public engagement until the numbers start to creep up. So you have unsolved crimes. You may not have people providing information, so your investigations may go longer. You may have more resources poured into investigations. You may have difficulty during police interactions. And when we have some of these types of things, especially difficulty during police interactions, the number one response that I always see with marginalized communities is they can just cooperate. Of course they can cooperate. Everyone can cooperate. But then when we talk about it in, like, if you were to think, well, why can't my child just cooperate? Because maybe they're hungry, maybe they slept bad, maybe they want something, maybe they have all of these other personal things that are affecting their way to cooperate with me. Why won't they just sit there and eat their dinner? Is the same thing that we could talk about on this big macro level with communities, is these micro interactions that you might have with your children or you might have with your coworker, is that there's so many other things at play that can make us feel a certain way. We have higher rates of resistance, difficulty recruiting diverse officers, and difficulty retaining those diverse officers. Looking specifically internally, you have that reduction of psychological safety, increased workplace tension, reduced collaboration and innovation, higher rates of attrition, and decreased engagement. And this is really what I want to talk to you about today, is how your workplaces are affected by EDI and what you can do to create safer spaces and spaces that help people thrive. Now, if I asked you, if I took a survey of all of you and I said, what does EDI look like at your organization, or what have you done? It's likely it fits into one of these 6 categories. It's likely you have done diversity hiring, you've done diversity training, successful or not successful. Both of those are initiatives. Diversity placements, which means that you've put people of certain demographics in certain parts of your community because you feel like that will respond to the diverse community, whether they speak that language, they look like that community, they just get that social norm. You've written diversity policies, you've put out public diversity statements or EDI statements, and you've created digital presence. You've added certain imagery to websites, or you've put things on social media, or whatever it may be. And so when we have all of these different checkbox components, that's kind of where it sits. EDI for a long time now has become representation, visibility. And the challenge with that visibility and that representation is sometimes we're bringing these people in to a space that isn't effective for them. I'm going to give you a couple examples. The first example is in the United States, and on their website, they have a plan to attract qualified individuals, and their plan is to meet specific goals for recruiting a diverse workforce in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender. And particular attention should be paid to attracting candidates in approximate proportion to the race, ethnic, and gender composition of the available workforce in town. So they're going stat for stat. So they want to hire 40% white, and they're currently at 73. They want to have 4% Black, and they're currently 1.2. They want to have 21% Hispanic, and they have 20. They want to have 0.1% Indigenous, and then they have 0. Or sorry, no, they have 1.25. And so as you go through this, you can see that they want to have a responsive demographic. Now, what is challenging to me here is when we start to get into a quantity-based assessment of diversity. It is macro often, But then we forget that there's all those micro experiences. You can have someone who's Black that has a different experience than another Black person. You can have someone that's white that has a different experience than another white person. And it also doesn't mean that just because I'm Black means that I should police the 1% of my Black community. Are you only going to send them to those calls? Are you only going to have them in that neighborhood? And what's the value of that? Because when we talk about EDI, we need to talk about the way that people relate to each other, the way they support each other, and how we can have empathy and understanding. And that doesn't have a number to it. It doesn't say, well, I am the one Black person that's going to be empathetic to the one Black person in my community. Because we need to create that across our demographics. Otherwise, we know that if we do this in other spaces, if you have a social worker and then you have more than one social worker, a call that requires a social worker, you can't get that person to every call at once. There's supports and resources out there that allow the conversation to happen. I know, and I think they're on the call, that there's companies that organizations in Alberta work with to allow language accessibility within their spaces. If we're not using the resources to create that equity and we're only trying to find a one-for-one opportunity, then it's going to be much harder. I'll give you 2 examples of Canadian. This is Peel Regional Police at the top, reflecting community. They're hiring based on community diversity through targeted recruitment and demographic alignment. And also the RCMP set goals for recruitment goals for Indigenous and racialized employees. I truly believe that if we want to move forward, we need to stop bringing people into spaces that are not healthy to begin with. And the reality is they're not. There's a big challenge for our communities right now is that people are being brought into spaces that are toxic. I work, the other part of my life is in skilled trades. And I work a lot increasing women in skilled trades, talking about learning differences in skilled trades. And when we're having these conversations, the importance is, why are you investing money on bringing people into an organization that they're going to leave? They're going to come in and realize it's problematic. They're going to come in and realize it's harmful. They're going to be harmed. They're going to cause harm. They're going to face increased risk, which is going to be so much more dollars than fixing your problem first. They can be done in tangent. You can bring people in while fixing your problems, but you have to do both. It can't just be, let's bring diverse people in and our problems will be solved. It has to be recognizing the challenges that you face in support of those people that you're bringing in. I clicked it 3 times now. It's just gonna go to like 4 slides from now. So I'm gonna ask you some serious questions. These are the most serious questions I'm gonna ask you all day. Promise. I need to know, does the toilet paper go over the roll or under the roll? Do you care? Do people care? Because yes, they do. And then I need you to tell me why it goes one way or the other. Because I've never seen so many people click so fast. They put their vote in. Tell me what you think. You can put your hand up to turn your mic on. You can put it in the chat. Tell me why the toilet paper goes one way or the other. I'm going to stop the vote in about 5 seconds because I've never seen so passionate people that if you are an under the roll, you're going to be shocked. Couple more seconds and I'm going to flip it to end the vote. Okay, let's have a conversation about this because I'm shocked. I'm very shocked. 58 of you said over the roll. 5 of you said under the roll. 16 of you said you just care that there is toilet paper. And surprisingly, no one was shocked that I asked this question. And that should tell you all you need to know about the group of people here today, is that no one was shocked that I asked this question. So I want to see, so a couple of people have commented in the chat. You can turn your mic on if you'd like to share as well. If it comes out under the roll, it can brush on the wall and get bacteria on it. Shannon, I need to know why your wall has bacteria on it, because that's a big question for me. Bonnie said easier to roll down when it's over. Candace said, oh, okay. You know what, Candace? I appreciate you bringing this up. Someone brings it up every time. I've asked this question to every group of people I've talked to for 5 years. And someone always brings up that the original inventors designed it to be over the roll. We'll talk about that in a second. Easier to grab, looks prettier, over the top, easy access. Don't want to have to reach under the toilet roll to grab my paper. It's not, you know what, Dana, it is madness that this is so much further than this, right? You're just like, oh, it's so far away if I have to do this. I get it. Easier to lower your hand and raise it. If you, I don't know, you know what? Now I'm starting to think, Michael, about like, if I'm sitting there and I got to go like this versus like this, the ergonomics of this, we can maybe argue that it goes the other way. Habit, easier not to think about it. Over the roll has less risk of it continuing to unravel. Leanne, you're speaking to my soul, the way it shows on the patent. And Brandy, if it's under the roll, can we all just take a second? That Brandy has admitted to my worst fear. Brandy, you changed the roll to the way you prefer at someone else's house. And I usually save this for like the end. And I say, I don't know if anyone knows this, but there's people that actually changed the roll at your house. And the fact that Cynthia also said that, can you put your hands up in the chat? Just throw your hand up if you change the roll at someone else's house to make it your preferred way. Because this is, or just put your hand up if you got to figure out how to put your hand up first. This is wild to me. So many of you, 3 people I see at least. So look there, Chelsea admitted to it. I am interested. So this is neat to me. The reason that I asked this question is because I don't know if some of you knew people were this passionate about toilet paper. And we are. I don't ask about the brand because the brand is also important, especially if you're a Costco person, then it becomes really important. And right now, I think they've made toilet paper cheap because it gets the little fluffies everywhere. And we start to see that there's some things. A few comments from my end, because I like to have my own opinion popped in here. The reason I'm so excited about the patent being brought up is because they're right. The patent is that the toilet paper goes over. And that's why they print the pattern on that way, because it looks prettier. And the reason is because you use more toilet paper when it's over and it comes out faster, and then you buy more toilet paper. And so you've all been capitalized and tricked into putting it over. But that's the point when someone will tell me that's okay, I count my squares and it's all going to be fine. So shocking over the roll group. Thank you for sharing that. Very excited. Now let me see where we're at. I need to know if what type of people we are. This is like an Alberta assessment, I think, as well, because I know the vibes in Ontario are very much, yes, socks with sandals. I wear socks with sandals. And I wear socks with slides, maybe not sandals. And so I'm very passionate about this topic as well. I'd like to hear your feedback about socks with sandals. When is it okay to wear socks with sandals? Oh, Lane, changed over the years. Why has it changed? What has changed you?
Comfort. I just want to be comfortable.
I like that. Comfort is a priority. We are no longer just following the beauty expectations of the world. I can wear my socks with sandals. Okay, that's true. But Lori, if you have nice dogs, then they're not barking. You can go home to your kids and say, if my dogs aren't barking, can they be worn out? Because then they'll really get it. So let's see where we're at. We are at a whopping 40 of you, 60% saying you cannot wear socks with sandals. Shocking. I'm noticing some people in the chat saying you can do it inside. The socks, do they have to be matching? I don't think so. I have to match my socks, but that's because I'm a very type A person. Oh, see, generational differences. Thank you, because we know all the Birkenstock people you wear Birkenstocks all year round, and then you start wearing socks with them. So it's a thing. Thank you. Okay, my last stand your ground question, and this one pulls out the heat from some people because they become passionate. What do you like better, books or movies? This is where we really separate people. I'm shocked. You have to choose. You must choose. You cannot have one or the other. You're forced. This is the most interesting result of them. We are currently split 50-50, even. It's happening. It is a hard one. I'm curious, for book people or movie people, why did you pick one is better than the other? Books are usually better, but you'll watch the movie anyways. But why are books better?
Books will tell you more of a detailed story and you can create it in your mind.
Okay.
And then sometimes the movie is disappointing because you don't have all the detail that you've created. But then sometimes, depending, like I see on here, sometimes the movie's just better because it's just better to watch it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm interested when you said that you can create the details in your mind, and I think I subconsciously would create the details in my mind of what things look like, but I'm not consciously being like, well, the brick on the house is definitely going to be like a dark brown, and the grass is maybe going to be mid-length. But you're right, it does just create in your mind naturally.
You create the characters mostly, like you'll create what they look like, you know, how they interact, and then if the movie doesn't follow that, you're like, that's not right.
You have more say. You have more say when it's a book, I think. All right. So we are at an almost even split, 35-37. Books took it. And I'm seeing a lot of different feedback in the chat. Spending so much time with a book that you're far more invested. That's true. I find that if I start a book, I have to finish it right away. So I can read it like a book in a couple days. Movies are more convenient if you're time challenged. That's very true. And so there's a lot of different big pieces that kind of fit into that when we talk about why we like one or the other. I think now, too, the big challenge is books are very expensive. And so people to invest time in books versus just catching a movie or watching Netflix or whatever it may be, it's definitely a different shift now than it used to be. And so we might have those different pieces to it. The reason I ask you all these questions is because I want you to start thinking about why you think the way you do. When we talk about EDI and the importance of thinking about why we think the way we do, it's helpful for us to understand that other people think differently and why they think differently. And so I want you to kind of take a step back. And even in a conversation like this, it's something so simple. And these are the micro conversations that you can start having that expand the way that you do perspective taking in your spaces. This is something that we do quite typically. I'm super excited. There's actually 4 of them. The 4th one's over here. But we actually launched our conversation decks this year. I haven't actually launched them yet. They're coming out this year. Where it's something that I've practiced for a long time. I started doing them in policing agencies a number of years ago, where I brought in questions like this, where I would ask, does pineapple go on pizza? And for your information, I am 45 minutes away from the invention of pineapple on pizza. And so the passion is very high here. But something as simple as having a conversation like this in your spaces starts to give people a low risk way to engage with diverse perspective. And so it doesn't have to be a big conversation about the historic inequities against Indigenous communities or carding against Black populations or why a Black person might have more fear. You can start in little conversations like this because you want to build the skill of perspective taking the skill of communication and feedback and how people are engaging and developing understanding and empathy. When you're able to have a conversation with someone about something on a micro level, about, do you prefer red sauce or white sauce on your pasta? Do you toast your bread before you make a sandwich? Those types of questions allow people to develop the skill. As I'll talk to you about what I found in my research, but we sometimes jump in too quickly because people that want to talk about EDI are passionate about EDI. And so we ask questions like, should we do XYZ when we're engaging with these communities? And they're big conversations. And these big conversations can be very scary for people because they haven't developed those skills at a low risk level yet. So let's talk about EDI. What is it? Do you know what it is? And when I say, do you know what it is, there's intention for asking this. When I asked in my research, I studied police officers in Canada. I had interviews with them across the country. And the first question I asked them to do was define EDI and explain it to me. And 100% of them could not do it. Wild. So the reason I want to start with, do we know what it is because sometimes it becomes this big thing and we haven't really broken down the terms to know what they mean to us. So EDI is psychological safety, equity, diversity, inclusion. Diversity is who you are. It's if you are a super salad person, if it's you prefer the Calgary Flames or the Edmonton Oilers, maybe you're a Canucks fan, maybe you're a Red Wings fan, maybe you're a Leafs fan. That's your diversity. That's being seen. That's being acknowledged for who you are as an individual, that you like something different, you think something different, you experience the world from that demographic. The second part of that is inclusion. It's how people say they hear you. I know you have a different experience than me. This is what you need. This is the inclusive piece. So I know that you are a vegan. That's your diversity. I'm going to make sure we have vegan food accessible at lunch for you. That's inclusion. And equity is when those opportunities exist in all spaces so that there's no barrier to opportunity. That's being valued. Having a vegan restaurant, having vegan options at restaurants. As someone who I'm allergic to everything, let me tell you. A restaurant hates to see me coming because I have a shellfish allergy, I have a nut allergy, I'm gluten-free, and I don't eat pork. And then on top of that, I'm also very picky with everything else. And so when I go eat somewhere, I have to spend probably a week before looking for menus of deciding where I want to go because can I go there? Is it safe to go there? Is it preferential? Because the only thing I can eat is the same on everyone's menu. So when we talk about EDI, it's about, do we know what the diversity is? Are we responding to it to remove barriers of opportunity? Think about if you're running a race and you have someone who's blind running a race and you have someone who's in a wheelchair running the race along with someone who's able-bodied. The able-bodied person more likely to win the race. If there's a steeplechase, the hurdle with the water, if there's a steeplechase, then it's very less likely for the person with the wheelchair to be successful. And you still have to hope that the blind runner can achieve knowing the path. By putting a ramp over the hurdle for the steeplechase, or if you give the blind runner a guide runner, that does not mean that they will win the race. What it means is that the barriers to opportunity to success are removed. So now they have the potential to succeed. When we talk about equity, we're talking about creating people's opportunity to succeed. It's not about giving someone more of an opportunity than the other. A lot of times we talk about privilege. People think, oh, when we do equity, we're giving them more opportunity. We're removing the barriers to opportunity. So now if there's lots of restaurants that have vegan options, vegetarian options, lots of gluten-free options now, that when I go out to eat, I don't have to worry, am I going to die? Can I eat something? Do I have to eat the same thing every time? Because people have responded knowing that my diversity is different. And the reason that I say EDI is psychological safety is because psychological safety is this equation spelled out: being seen for who you are, being heard for what you need, and being valued by that opportunity being there for you. But psychological safety is so much more than that. It's mental health, because it's someone's opportunity to be validated and valued as an individual. It's their well-being, because they're not facing additional barriers in their spaces. It's self-care, because now they're not maybe harming or tormenting themselves mentally, psychologically, as a result of not being valued in a space. It's their confidence, because they say, I can achieve because people want me to achieve, not just always facing barriers. And it's physical safety, because when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about physical safety. If you've ever had one of those days where you're in a headspace where you're kind of just not all there, then you may make mistakes, choose something different, have an error. It's often when we're in our heads about something that we mess up. We do something different. We don't follow protocol. We don't follow procedure. And that stems from poor psychological safety. We're out of our headspace. That is functional. When we talk about leadership models, you can look at situational leadership. It's in two parts. It's skills and knowledge, and confidence and motivation. And when we talk about how those fit together, skills and knowledge is often where we focus for physical safety. And you say, well, they have the skill, they have the knowledge. We use of force training, we do weapons training, and so they're prepared. We forget that there's also the confidence and motivation piece that fits in here, because you can have all the skills in the world and still make a critical error, harming yourself or someone else, because that motivation and confidence isn't there. And we lose the ability to apply our skills and knowledge. When we look at how this fans out into the organization, it goes from that individual, things like self-awareness and emotional regulation, all the way out to societal. So this is the way that our bias awareness and decision-making is affected, our conflict resolution, it affects recruitment and retention, increased reporting, it affects the way that our community well-being improves, and that our policies change or organizations reform. Psychological safety fits into all of these components because it's how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we support and communicate with each other. It's that trust that we need for organizational efficiency, it's the trust we need for relationships, and it's the trust we need for communication. So I mentioned that it's mental health, well-being, self-care, confidence, and physical safety. It is the way that we engage in our spaces and how we engage with other people. And I want to show you what that looks like in real life. So when we talk about the workplace, this kind of takes you into a tier from that individual to society. So it could be the way you take perspective. Something so simple is how we can view how someone else is coming into this conversation. The advanced law enforcement program I'm operating through St. Clair right now, we have Windsor police officers in it. And I had a conversation with one of these officers today about his learning through it. He's in a very senior position, and he said, you know, Janelle, when I started, these expectations were just a work expectation. And this is just how you showed up and what you did. And now people need you to celebrate them, tell them explicitly that they're doing a good job, validate them. And he goes, I don't get why they need that to do their job. And so as we had the conversation, he was able to say, I guess generationally, they're just different. And that was where I was so excited that he got, because when he was able to see that generationally, they function differently. So then he was able to change the way he communicated, which affects the interpersonal relationships, which can affect the conflict that you have on teams or the lack of support you have on teams. We talk about mentorship and the development of employees. And that affects the organization, because now you have more efficiency and more effective outcomes in the way that you're engaging, all because the perspective of the individual was taken differently. How this cycles and ripples out in the workplace is very important to recognize, because when we talk about why we're doing EDI, if you're having a conversation about why you're doing EDI, if you need to get someone's buy-in, or maybe you are trying to get that buy-in for yourself, you can look at how it cycles here. Starting in the top left, unsafe work climates, toxic environments, lack of psychological safety. leads to suppressed expression. People aren't going to share how they feel about things. They're not going to bring up ideas, bring up safety risks, things like that. That leads to internalized stress, which leads to defensive behavior. Because if I'm stressed, then I'm going to be short with people. I'm going to be communicating less effectively. And that leads to interpersonal breakdown. Our relationships are going to be harmed. And then when we have bad relationships in our workplace, it leads to unfair treatment, because now I'm going to treat someone differently because I don't like them because they don't like me, or because I don't like them because they don't share information with me. So I'm not going to share information with them. That causes an erosion of trust, because now we have unfair treatment. Someone may align with a senior leader and someone may not. Someone may align with the community and someone may not. That leads to that group polarization. That goes back to organizational blindness and reinforces that unsafe environment, which again cycles all the way through. So when we're talking about psychological safety being physical safety, we're talking about it in all aspects of the organization. We're looking at how it affects the individual, how that individual relationship affects the community served, how the community served affects the relationship with the other officers, how it goes into the organization and your development, backwards out into how people are treated. It's a full cycle, and every aspect of your organization fits into this. So I'm going to ask you, and I'm very excited to hear your reasons. I'm going to ask you why you're doing EDI. Maybe not. Poll result. Oh, I'm still sharing a poll result. Please hold while I sort myself out. I want you to tell me why you're doing EDI. And if one of these doesn't fit for you, please share in the chat. And the reason I'm asking you this is because it's important to know why you're doing the work in your organization. And when we have a purpose or a why behind it, it drives our motivation, our intentions, and our outcomes. And when we have a why behind it, it helps us buy in other people. I'm going to show you after this the findings from my research. And why was the #1 question asked. I don't know why we're hiring people of specific demographics. I don't know why I'm taking EDI training. I don't know why they're doing this. I don't know why we're doing this. Why are we having EDI? What's the purpose of EDI? And so I like to ask, why are you doing it? Because it's important, so important for you to know why you're doing it. But then also that carries out into the conversations that you're having about EDI. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, how are they supposed to buy in to that investment of why we're having this? So I see a lot of people kind of mulling across them, and excited to see that not everyone is voting for the organizational or legal requirements, though I do want to recognize that it is so important that you do keep that in mind. So I'm going to post the results, and I want to share with you these findings. To build trust with the community, to strengthen culture and morale, to improve how we serve diverse communities, and to meet organizational and legal requirements. Really, these are just 4 of so many very important whys. And yes, organizational and legal requirements is important, because that's the foundation of your organizations is you're upholding the law. Human rights are a law. The way that we communicate with other people and how we support each other's is so important. I do appreciate the comment in the chat. I'm curious if people answered that question as themselves, the individual, or their intentions coming from their service, because that is also very important. Because while you're doing it, especially for my own experience, I'm doing it because my background, my own personal experiences as a marginalized person, experiencing the world, then that can be very different, you're right, than the organization's vision forward. So I'm glad that that was brought up. So when we're talking about why we're doing it, I like to think from the negative lens. Because when we think from the positive lens, it doesn't always get the buy-in that we need. If I say I want morale to improve, people are like, okay, cool. I want people to have more trust. Okay, cool. Because they don't know what that looks like all the time. When we look at it from the negative lens, they can relate to it. If we have people who have challenges, they can relate to it. And these are your larger categories. And so it may not be the exact thing. So if you have interpersonal conflict, it may show up as low morale. If you have interpersonal conflict, it could show up as a communication breakdown. It could show up as poor emotional regulation. It could show up as reputational decline, whatever they are. But these whys are where you have to find the reasoning within your people. Are your team members struggling to receive information from certain demographic? Are they struggling to work with certain colleagues? Is there an issue with cross-shift communication? Is there an issue with leadership from certain people? What is the challenges that you're facing? Because EDI is everything we do. When we talked about how it's psychological safety, it's about seeing the differences, recognizing those differences, and supporting them to reduce the barriers that those people are facing. That happens all across our organization all the time. It is, but not just recruitment and retention. It's not just the morale. It's not just people supporting the innovation of an organization, contributing to that growth through communication. It's not just their success in the workplace, whether it's their lack of errors or their physical safety. It's all of that. And it's all of these pieces together. So when you're taking EDI and applying it to everything, you're growing all of those spaces. So I want to talk to you about what's working. The first question I have for you is, what's working and says who? I want you to tell me in the chat, who do you seek information from to say that what you're doing in your organization works? Or what are you doing in the public works? How do you do it? Are you doing surveys? Are you doing community forums? Are you doing pulse checks? Are you doing interviews? Are you doing focus groups? How do you know what you're doing is working? And this question is important because I want you to think about what stakeholders you're engaging, why you're engaging certain stakeholders, what the action from engaging those stakeholders is. So what's the purpose of engaging them? When you're doing it, how often you're doing it, the method you're doing it. All of these things are important questions to ask. Because when we talk about what's working and then who's telling us that's working, there can be a big gap. Because who's telling us may not be the people that we're gapped on. What's not working? So this is going to be a little, not heavier, but it's going to be heavier in the sense that this is my opportunity to tell you what I've learned. And I'm going to tell it to you in 5 parts. So I'm going to talk to you about, this is my key findings from the research that I've done. And this is also parallel to the work that I've had the opportunity to engage with policing organizations in Canada and the United States. I had the opportunity to work with the Department of Defense. I've worked with Los Angeles County police officers. I've worked with and had conversations about EDI training with the FBI. I've worked in our own federal policing organizations. And so all the way from the top, all the way to a policing agency in Lake Placid, Florida, that had 1 officer on at a time, the same barriers exist. And I want to talk to you about these because this is where you start. Conceptual ambiguity of EDI, influence of officer identity, representation versus merit tensions, training approach and accountability gaps, and organizational resistance. These are the findings directly pulled from my research, statistically and quoted. So everything you're seeing is directly from Canadian police officers. 100% of officers had difficulty defining equity, diversity, and inclusion. 70% of them had a narrow or unclear definition, and 60% didn't see it as relevant. Some of the comments were related to hiring. They don't do hiring, so it's not important for them to know about it. Lots of conversation about EDI being tied to communism and liberal perspectives. We were talking about the difference between what it is and what it's not. I had a number of people communicate with me saying that they reached out to their organization or that they went on the website asking their organization or looking it up on what their website said. And so even having the opportunity to Google it, getting from that definition to doing the work and knowing what it looks like in their day-to-day, 100% of the people could not do it. They couldn't make that connection between what EDI is and what it looks like in the workplace. And so my first comment to you is, how do you alleviate that gap? Where do you create low risk conversations? How do you show conceptually what EDI looks like in the day to day? How do you walk them through a conversation like, if a vegan needs vegan food, then that's EDI. If someone needs a ramp to access a building, that's EDI. If we are going to include an interpreter, that's EDI. If you need to take stress leave or time off, that's EDI. Having these small conversations in the big conversation are so critically important. The second conversation that I had, and the second theme that popped up in these conversations in my research is officers with marginalized identities or who have close relations to people with a marginalized identity view EDI more positively. The reason that this exists is because people who have experienced it are more willing to talk about it and view the work to alleviate it as more critical. Thinking back to the beginning, we talked about the arena and how if you're sitting at the back of the arena looking forward, you can see the people getting the t-shirt cannons. And actually there was a video, and I don't know where it was, but they were throwing the hot dogs with, it must have been at the World Series. They were throwing the hot dogs with the parachutes on them, and they were throwing them from the third tier. They were throwing them down to the second tier. And then people were like, throw them backwards, throw them at us. And they just kept throwing them over to the closer rows. And so this reminds me of this theme, because the people who are experiencing harm see the value in alleviating harm and alleviating those barriers. And people who don't have these harm and barriers may not view the efforts and initiatives the same way. So when we go back to the why and you say, why are we doing this? How can we integrate it? And you talk about the workplace issues, whether it's interpersonal conflict, or you have increased physical risk for officers, or you have interpersonal conflict or communication breakdown. The things that matter to people are your connection to EDI, which means that it's not just marginalized communities, it's everyone, because everyone functions in response to EDI better in the workplace. 100% of the marginalized officers that were interviewed said that they felt extra educational labor because of their identity, having to provide additional information, clarify things, re-educate officers, provide additional support for how to engage with marginalized communities. And 80% of those people also felt a reduced psychological safety because of these added risks, because they're now putting their identity on the front line to support their colleagues and coworkers. And so the added risk, really important here, because marginalized communities are already affected because they're the only ones that are being recognized. They're seeing the EDI issues, they're experiencing the EDI issues. Now they have to educate others on the EDI issues. And so it's that compounding harm because they're doing and experiencing at the same time. And that's really important. One of those scenarios we're going to talk about specifically at the end today. The third theme I want to bring up represented 90% of the conversations. Tensions emerge between diversity representations and perceptions of merit within police culture. So the traditional idea of what makes a good police officer and what qualifies people to be in these spaces or whatever it may be. When I talk about the sub-themes here, it was tokenism concerns tied to identity-based assumptions. So not only do we have diversity hires being questioned for their ability, now anyone who's of a marginalized community is recognized as, you're only here because of your demographic. And then that person feels it as well. Am I only here because of my demographic? Am I only here because I speak this language? Am I only here because I'm brown? Am I only here because I'm from this community? Because now that has been so prioritized that it becomes harmful to everyone involved. The interesting thing here is I had a conversation with it was a white male officer, is the top left comment. And he had said in 2004, his score wasn't high enough as a white male. And so he was stuck on the idea that because different demographics scores were rated differently, he would have been a police officer for that organization much sooner if he was the right, quote unquote, right demographic to get for his score to be valued higher. And so I think what's important here is we start to talk about what is merit, what is valuable, what is purposeful. and the value behind that why are people hiring them? Why are people being recognized? It's really important to recognize here. Shauna, go ahead.
Just on that topic, do you mind expounding just on the piece? I know it earlier when the conversation submerged looking at anti-racism and racial equity and talking about equity, justice, and equality. One of the constant narrative we heard was this idea of reverse racism. And I think that's what you're touching base on. That, and you, just to tie it back to the statement you just made, to say that until people are affected, it's oftentimes not seen. Or even if it's seen, there's an opportunity for willful ignorance because you're not affected. We move when we are affected. So when someone now, the situation you just talked about, when somebody now sees the effects of what historically has been for others, now that they feel like the effect is touching them, now it is, if I was the right, from the right group, but this is the narrative or sentiment that people from those group has felt historically until times where conversations like EDI. So when we talk about resistance, resistance is not, from my understanding, not just from an academic, but from a lived experience, is not always about ignorance or lack of understanding. It is that it is purposeful, because I don't want to release something that I've always enjoyed. Just if you could talk about just the reverse, like racism piece of that, would be really great.
Yeah. So I appreciate that you brought that up, because I talked about that at the very beginning, or not at the very beginning, when I was talking about the historical injustices that have happened over a long period of time. And then recently, within the last couple of months, now we see that the fallout of the death of Charlie Kirk has resulted in this uprising of a new marginalized, quote, I'm going to say quote unquote marginalized community, because now that reverse racism piece is there. A big conversation I've had with officers is reverse racism, anti-white racism, it's called meninism is the term that it's being brought up, and then there's religious discrimination against Christian and Catholic populations, and then also just generally against colonialism. And the challenge that I have with this is we talk about EDI in this umbrella, and racism is talked about in an umbrella. We don't look at the history behind it or the why behind it. Racism, the historical harm, the compounding harm, the systemic harm about how it's fit into little things. In my area, it wasn't until the 70s that non-white people were able to buy land in our cottage country area. It was a law that it could not be sold to people of color. The same thing has happened in other communities in Canada. And those over periods of time create inequity for these groups. The issue we're seeing now with anti-white racism or reverse discrimination is that we're building responsive action. We're not building proactive action or intervention action. And so we're being responsive to harm. We're not alleviating harm, we're just talking about harm. And we're talking about harm on a surface level. You're not allowing me to be there. And so therefore that is racism. You're not communicating my experience or prioritizing my experience, and therefore that is racism. So when we talk about anti-white racism or or meninism, when we talk about the priorities of males, the polarization of from representation and from equity has removed psychological safety. And that's why I like to say that EDI is psychological safety, because it's not racism. It's not discrimination against men, but it is, in a lot of cases, the way it's done, not supportive of the psychological safety of dominant demographic groups. It is, you're a white male, so you're privileged. You're a white male, so you have priority. You're a white male, so you're problematic. You're a white male, so you're a part of the colonial history of harm. And so we're going to do X, Y, Z. There's a way to have that conversation that recognizes history, recognizes the historic impact of it and the fallout without harming the individual's psychological safety. And that's, I think, the gap on it. And I'm not saying that we aren't, there isn't cases of discrimination against dominant demographics, but we don't have these conversations in a way that's safe for everyone. And I think that's where our biggest challenges are. I hope that answered your question. We can chat more about that at the end of this and another day, but I appreciate you bringing it up. So going into the next part of the conversation is the really important part, because this is how you do it. This is the EDI that you do. So we're talking about training. 100% of the people loved to talk about how their training was, because why not? So training approach, content formats, and accountability shapes how EDI content is received and retained. So here specifically, the importance of it is 100% of people said that the content was limited, because there's that traditional perspective of what training should be and how it should look. And it's death by PowerPoint is one of the comments in the bottom. And it's the irony that we're doing a virtual training session where I'm killing you by PowerPoint. Low engagement due to the training approach, perceptions of training as accusatory or blaming. So back to that conversation. We need to have a conversation about what is happening in an objective way, the impacts of what's happening in an objective way, and recognize everyone involved is experiencing harm in some way or another. And the lack of focus on internal workplace relationships was also brought up, recognizing that a lot of EDI training is done talking about how policing organizations need to improve their relationships with the community, but not how they need to improve their relationships within each other. And it goes back to that meme I posted, the "this is fine" or the lobsters in the hot tub, is we can't help other people if we haven't helped ourselves. And you get in an airplane and they say, put your mask on before you put on other people's mask. You cannot expect police officers to go into communities and support the psychological safety and have empathy and have care if they aren't giving it to themselves. Because that's someone harmed in a harmful situation. And that's where you start to see that breakdown and that issue persist. The last theme was related to the organizational structure and culture, and external social influences that influenced EDI process and barriers. 80% of people recognized that they felt EDI was performative in the way that it was being done. And that came from like large organizations who say, I have the top left quote, I have 45 calls on the docket, and then they are expected to a 6-hour e-learning. Or they have other things that are going on, and there's other relationships, there's brotherhoods, it's the boys club, there's lots of things that are disconnected. Larger organizations, it's really challenging because you have it tiered out and it might not be interconnected in a way that can be effective. And you can have one break in communication and that affects everyone else in there. Because if the top's not turning around and looking at everyone else, then you're not going to know what's going on in the back. So what do you do with this information? Because I've given you a lot of information and now I want to tell you what to do with it. So the first thing, as you start to DIY your EDI, as you start to kind of shift how you're going to do it, you need to refresh it. Define what EDI is and build their why. Find out what problems are persisting in your organization, and you have to make that connection for them. If you know that information is not getting properly documented, find out why and connect it to EDI. Is it because they weren't trained properly? Is it because the training that they were provided wasn't inclusive to their learning differences? Is it because they don't have a mentorship relationship in their specific platoon? What is the issues that they're facing that are prevalent in your organization, and how can you connect that back to EDI? And EDI, that psychological safety, they need to be seen, heard, and valued. They need to be seen for their diversity. They need to be heard for what they need, and they need to be valued by the action that happens as a result. Getting people's buy-in shows them that you recognize what issues they're facing, and you're showing them that, hey, we see what's going on. EDI can help us alleviate those stressors and those issues. That takes you into getting buy-in from your influencers. Your influencers are formal and informal people in your workplace and in the public that can contribute to that buy-in because they have that cultural influence, they have the organizational influence, and also the public influence. Because you can have people in the public that can harm the psychological safety of your team members, and you can have people in your team members that can harm the psychological safety of your public. You have to have that united front going forward. And third, collaborate with your stakeholders. This is something that I am time and time again shocked that I come across, that organizations don't initiate relationships with community partners. I've had conversations with chiefs on countless times where they said, oh, they haven't reached out to us. They haven't asked us to come to their event. They haven't invited us. Okay, invite yourself. Ask them how you can come learn about them. Ask them how you can come learn from them, how you can engage with them, what your community needs, how they can support them. And do it in a way that values them as knowledge keepers, as people that can improve your organization. Because if you have newcomers and you have a large demographic of newcomers and you never ask them, how can we help you? What are you missing? Why? What are your hesitations? Then how do you build resources to support that? Right now, the big barrier I find is the relationship between police and the public and what you can and can't do and what the public can say or should say or how you should act. If you go to another country, police relationships are very different. Share what a traffic stop looks like. Share what it looks like to report something. Share what an interview looks like. Have these conversations to build those relationships. And internally, build those relationships in a way that's not tokenizing. It is very easy to say, oh, hey, that officer is of that demographic. Let's send them to that call. Let's send them to that community event. But what does that say about the rest of your demographics? How are you showing them the development of empathy? How are you creating opportunity for them to understand? When we're talking about refreshing EDI, we're talking about doing what you're already doing in an intentional way. Then when we talk about building accessible and sustainable training, because ultimately you have an idea of what you're doing, now we need to kind of inform people on how to do it. Start with that low risk and interactive opportunity. Create everyday topic conversations that help people relate to these complex concepts. You were passionate about toilet paper. You were passionate about books or movies. You're passionate about socks with sandals. That's where you start. You don't have to explain to people what you're doing is EDI. That's this, that's that. Start developing the skills. Develop communication skills, develop empathy, develop perspective taking. Allow people to get comfortable with having these types of conversations before it becomes very complex and controversial. Frame it from the benefit. Skills displayed versus blame. How are they going to apply this into their community? How are they going to apply this on a call? How can you be curious in the way that you question people instead of accusatory? What are the ways you can connect it outward so that their skills are being benefited? How are they improving? Because if we come to it from a blame perspective, that hostility comes in, their walls go up, and they're not learning. We're not retaining information. We want to make sure we give them the space to do so. Skills outcome and paired training. So you want to have evidence outcomes of skills development, specific and micro-focused. So if you do this, you get this, and that's the why. Connect it back to that definition. If you do this, this is the outcome. Is that going to be 100% of the time? No. But over time, we're going to see those improved relationships. If you do this within your platoon, your colleagues might change, and that's going to benefit this. If you do this within this public community or this public group, over time, the relationships can develop. And then lastly, consistent on-the-job opportunities. It doesn't have to be annual one-off training. It doesn't have to be 6-hour training. It can be micro-learning case studies. When you have parade or you're doing lineup or whatever your organization calls it, when you have those micro-learning opportunities, those debriefs, you're showing them that why consistently. It's job related, it's applicable to the now, and it's relative to them. They see the importance in it. And to do that, you have to have a clear understanding of what EDI is and why we're doing it. Because then you could fit it into anything. I could have a conversation about EDI. I could break down anything into EDI because I know what it is. And that builds your buy-in and it builds the autonomy to do so because now they're doing it at their pace in a safe space with their safe people. And it's not something that's happening to them. It's something that's happening with them and they're developing themselves. I'm going to I'm going to walk you through this, but I'm not going to ask you to interact as deeply as I wanted you to. This is a scenario that I had encountered in a Canadian policing organization, and I want to walk through it with you. A few officers are sitting in a shared workspace, half focused on completing their mandatory online training for the 2S LGBTQ inclusion module. It's an asynchronous click-through training on gender identity, respectful language, and report writing, including AMAB and AFAB terminology. As the module plays, one officer scrolls through their phone, muttering, "Fuck this woke bullshit, man." And another officer, glancing over a report draft, laughs and says, "Hey, remember that derogatory slur? Couple from Elm Street. Wonder what QRSTUV thing we call them now." The group chuckles. "Fucked up," the other officer says. At a nearby desk, a non-out trans gay officer is quietly working. When one officer misreads the AMAB AFAB section out loud, that officer steps in, offers a calm clarification about how the terms relate to respectful report writing and documentation. The group nods and one person mutters, "You can't say anything anymore." Moments later, another officer clicks through the last slide of the module saying, "Done. Guess I'm officially certified in sensitivity." The reason I share this is because this real scenario that happened in a Canadian policing organization has major impacts. And the impacts I want you to think about are micro impacts, like dismissive humor, jokes about gender identity, minimizing the content and creating hostile undertones, identity safety for that non-out officer who's experiencing discomfort, fear of exposure, and judgment. We're talking about interpersonal relationships. So we talk about peer normalization, the laughter, the language use, and the informal language in a formal setting, becoming socially acceptable. And then at a macro level, we're looking at a training design flaw. The asynchronous checkbox training that doesn't have new reflection opportunity, dialogue, or accountability mechanisms. And we're also looking at creating a culture of silence because the absence of supervisors or supervisory presence during training or a follow-up allows for that bias to persist because now they've just moved through it and there's not an effective sustainability model here. The reason I like to bring up this scenario for you is because it's really important to recognize that the scenario is not just the scenario in that second, it's the scenario in the micro experience, the relationships, and that larger organizational barrier that you're facing. So what we talked about today, we talked about reframing. We acknowledged where we are and how we are right now. I hopefully explained why EDI matters to you, applying what works, trying new visions, doing it in the everyday, and using the takeaway tools. So where do you go from here? And that's a very important question because this is a lot of information in a short amount of time. At the link that you registered at, which you'll get via email as well, there's a 30, 60, 90-day plan. This 30, 60, 90-day plan that you can download gives you some key questions to ask yourself as you're starting to look at the work that you might be doing and really just checking in. So I encourage you to take those pre-learning and post-learning materials and really create a plan with your teams as you try to revision what EDI looks like.